Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Always glad to be back.
Today we're exploring something called deconcentration.
Sounds intense.
It does, right? Deconcentration, a technique for training your attention.
Right.
Now, I know what you're thinking. That sounds a bit intimidating, right? But trust me, it's way more fascinating than it sounds.
It really is.
We'll be using Oleg Bakhtiarov's work as our guide today.
Ah, yes. Going straight to the source.
He developed this whole technique back in the 1980s.
That's right.
So we're going straight to the source for this one.
Should be interesting.
So let's start with the basics. What exactly is deconcentration? When I hear that word, I kind of imagine someone spacing out, But I have a feeling that's not quite it.
You're right. It's not about zoning out at all.
Okay.
Bakhtiarov defined deconcentration, often shortened to DKV,
Okay.
as evenly distributing your attention across your entire field of perception.
So it's not just letting your mind wander.
No, it's a deliberate process.
Okay, so if I'm understanding this right,
Yeah.
it's less about focusing intensely on one thing
Right.
and more about being aware of everything around you.
You got it.
Okay.
Think of it like switching from a narrow spotlight to a floodlight.
Interesting.
Instead of focusing all your energy on one point, you're trying to illuminate a wider area.
Okay, I'm starting to get the picture.
Yep.
But why did Bakhtiarov develop this technique in the first place? Was he just trying to help people be more, mindful of their surroundings?
It actually came from a very specific need.
Oh.
He was working with people in high-pressure jobs, bodyguards, security personnel, anyone who needed to react quickly and effectively in unpredictable situations.
Ah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
I can see how traditional meditation techniques where you're trying to quiet your mind
Yeah,
wouldn't be very helpful if you need to be hyper aware of your environment.
exactly.
Yeah.
Existing methods at the time, like autogenic training,
Mm-hmm.
where you focus on relaxing your body and mind,
Right.
they just weren't cutting it in those high-stakes situations.
Makes sense.
So Bakhtiarov realized that these mental techniques,
Yeah.
they needed to be integrated into the task itself,
Not something separate.
not something separate.
So deconcentration was almost like a necessity.
Hmm.
A way to give these people a mental edge in really tough spots.
Precisely.
Interesting.
To really understand how deconcentration works,
Yeah.
it's helpful to compare it to its opposite,
Okay.
concentration.
Right. We're all familiar with concentrations.
Yeah.
Focusing on a single object or thought.
Exactly.
When you're really focused on a task or trying to solve a problem.
Right.
So is deconcentration the opposite of that? Is it about not focusing on anything at all?
It's more about dissolving the boundaries
Okay.
between what you're focusing on and everything else.
Okay.
Imagine you're looking at a painting.
Okay.
With concentration, you might zoom in on a specific detail.
Yeah.
With deconcentration, you try to take in the whole canvas at once,
The whole thing.
letting the figures blend into the background.
That's a helpful image.
Yeah.
So concentration is like a laser pointer
Ah.
highlighting a single point,
Yes.
while deconcentration is like that floodlight again,
Exactly.
illuminating everything equally.
Right.
But there's more to it than just that, right? Didn't Bakhtiarov talk about different types of deconcentration?
He did.
Okay.
He distinguished between two main types, planar deconcentration and volumetric deconcentration.
Planar and volumetric, those sound pretty technical.
Yeah, they do.
Yeah, can you break those down for me? What makes them different?
Sure. Planar deconcentration,
Mm-hmm.
think of that as a more inward experience.
Okay.
It's kind of similar to those relaxation techniques we talked about,
Okay.
where your attention detaches from the external world
Mm-hmm.
and your body and mind enter a calmer state.
So if planar is about tuning out the world, what about volumetric? Does that mean you become super focused on everything around you?
It's more about engaging with your environment
Okay.
in a heightened state of awareness.
Got it.
Imagine your senses are all turned up,
Okay.
and you're picking up on subtle details you might normally miss,
But,
but instead of feeling overwhelmed,
right.
you're alert and ready to respond.
So with planar, you're more relaxed and detached. And with volumetric, you're energized and engaged.
Right.
And those are just descriptions, What does it actually feel like to experience these different types of deconcentration?
Well,
Can you give us an example?
Bakhtiarov actually shares a fascinating story in his work.
Okay.
He describes how he was practicing planar deconcentration,
Uh-huh.
achieving that detached state,
Okay.
when suddenly his instructor looked directly at him.
Oh, wow.
And that single look was enough to completely break his state of deconcentration.
So just a look could have that much power.
It shows how subtle but powerful attention can be,
Right.
and how easily our state of deconcentration can be broken.
That makes me wonder,
Yeah.
if a simple look can disrupt planar deconcentration, what happens when you're trying to practice volumetric deconcentration
Right.
in a chaotic environment?
Yeah.
How do you stay in that heightened state of awareness
Yeah,
without getting totally overwhelmed by everything going on around you?
that's a great question.
Yeah.
And it really gets to the heart of what makes deconcentration so valuable.
Okay.
It's not just about expanding your awareness.
That's about.
It's also about learning to manage and control that expanded awareness
Ah, I see.
so you can function effectively even in the most demanding situations.
So it's almost like training your attention to be both expansive and selective at the same time.
Exactly.
Wow.
You're not just taking everything in indiscriminately.
Right.
You're learning to filter and prioritize information
Uh-huh.
in a way that lets you respond effectively to the demands of the moment.
That's really interesting.
But before we dive deeper into that,
Yeah.
let's take a closer look at some of the specific benefits Bakhtiarov found in his research.
Sounds good to me. Let's find out what this deconcentration can actually do.
Welcome back.
All right. So,
We've been exploring deconcentration
yes.
and how it can help us expand and control our attention.
Right.
Before the break, we were about to delve into some of the remarkable benefits.
Yes, the benefits. We've talked about, the what and the why, but what kind of results did Bakhtiarov actually see from using this technique?
Well, one of the most striking findings
Okay.
was that deconcentration could actually help people perceive things they couldn't before.
Really?
Bakhtiarov's colleagues, Dr. Galina Naumova,
Okay.
she worked with people who had difficulty distinguishing certain colors.
So they were essentially colorblind.
Yeah, to some extent.
Interesting.
She had them practice deconcentration
Uh-huh.
while looking at charts with hidden figures within patterns of color.
Okay.
And amazingly,
Yeah.
many of them could suddenly identify the figures,
Wow.
even though they couldn't consciously see those specific colors.
Hold on, that's incredible. So it's like their brains were bypassing the usual visual pathways.
Right.
How is that even possible?
That's the remarkable thing about deconcentration.
Yeah.
It seems to tap into a different level of processing.
Sim.
It's like your brain is able to access information that's normally filtered out by your conscious awareness.
Wow, that makes you wonder what other hidden abilities we might be able to unlock with this technique.
Who knows?
But let's back up for a sec.
Sure.
You mentioned that Bakhtiarov developed specific exercises to actually cultivate deconcentration.
He did.
What would those look like? What would a deconcentration workout be like?
Well, one of the basic exercises focuses on your visual field.
Okay.
Imagine you're standing in a park, surrounded by trees, people walking by, birds flying overhead.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
Instead of focusing on any one thing,
Yeah.
you would try to distribute your attention evenly across the entire scene,
The whole scene.
taking it all in as one big picture.
That sounds really hard.
It can be tricky
Yeah.
because it's like you have to fight your natural instinct to focus on specific things.
Right. Like, oh, look, a cute dog.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It takes practice to override those ingrained habits of attention.
So where do you even begin?
You can start with short intervals, maybe a minute or two,
Okay.
and gradually build up your capacity
Got it.
to maintain that wide diffuse awareness.
So it's like building a muscle, but for your attention.
Yeah, in a way. Interesting.
But we don't just experience the world through sight.
Right.
We also hear things, feel things, smell things.
Of course.
Did Bakhtiarov have exercises for those senses too?
He did.
Okay, tell me about those.
For auditory deconcentration,
Okay.
you might focus on the overall soundscape,
Okay.
the hum of traffic, the rustling of leaves, distant voices,
Okay.
without getting caught up in any particular town.
So instead of listening to the melody of a song, I'd be tuning into all the individual notes and harmonies as one big wave of sound.
Precisely.
Wow.
And for tactile deconcentration, the practice might involve becoming aware of the sensations of your clothes on your skin,
Okay.
the pressure of your feet on the ground, the feeling of the air on your face,
Yeah.
all at the same time.
So it's like,
It's about experiencing your body as a whole rather than focusing on individual parts.
okay, I can see how that could be a powerful way to shift your awareness.
Right.
But we touched on something earlier that I thought was really intriguing.
What's that?
Background thinking.
Oh, yes.
Can you remind me what that is and how it connects to deconcentration?
Sure. Background thinking is a mode of thought
Okay.
that arises from this expanded awareness we've been talking about.
Okay.
It's different from our usual linear way of thinking, which is like a spotlight moving from one point to the next.
Right. Very focused.
Yeah, but background thinking is more like a floodlight,
Okay.
illuminating a wider area of your mind.
So instead of analyzing things step by step, I
Yeah.
might suddenly see connections between ideas that seemed totally unrelated before.
Wow. It's a more intuitive, holistic way of thinking.
Like having a breakthrough.
It can be like that.
That's so interesting. It's like you're tapping into a deeper well of creativity that's always there.
Yeah,
But we usually don't know how to access it.
right.
But did Bakhtiarov mention any downsides or challenges associated with deconcentration?
He did.
Like what?
He cautioned that deconcentration isn't a magic bullet.
Right, it's not going to solve all your problems overnight.
No.
So what does it take?
It takes consistent practice,
Okay.
patience, and a willingness to challenge your ingrained mental habits.
Right, like anything worthwhile, it takes effort.
Exactly.
But were there any potential risks? Like, what if someone with anxiety or PTSD tried this? Could it make things worse for them?
That's an important consideration.
Yeah,
Bakhtiarov emphasized the need for caution and guidance,
okay.
especially for people with mental health conditions.
That makes sense.
He stressed that deconcentration shouldn't be used to escape from reality or avoid dealing with difficult emotions.
So it's not a replacement for therapy or other forms of treatment?
No, it's more like a complementary tool
Okay.
that could be used to enhance well-being.
But it needs to be approached responsibly.
Absolutely.
And he said it shouldn't be forced, right?
Right.
Like if you're feeling any resistance or discomfort, it's better to back off and seek guidance from a qualified teacher.
Yes, that's important.
Yeah, good advice. I'm starting to see how powerful this technique can be,
It is.
but also how important it is to use it wisely.
Right.
Now, there's one more thing I'm really curious about.
Okay.
You mentioned Bakhtarov connected deconcentration to altered states of consciousness.
He did.
Can you elaborate on that? What did he mean by that? Are we talking about meditation, trance, states, out-of-body experiences?
Bakhtiarov saw deconcentration as a kind of bridge
Okay.
between ordinary awareness and those extraordinary states of consciousness you mentioned.
Okay, so like,
He believed that by dissolving the usual boundaries of perception, we could access deeper levels of awareness,
interesting.
similar to what's described in yogic traditions and mystical experiences.
Okay, now we're getting into some really fascinating territory.
It is fascinating.
Yeah, but before we go too far down that rabbit hole,
Right.
we're going to have to pick this up in part 3.
Looking forward to it.
Okay, so we're back, and we've been talking all about deconcentration, from sharpening our focus to expanding our awareness and even, tapping into a different way of thinking. But we left off on the idea that deconcentration could actually lead to altered states of consciousness.
Yeah, that's right.
And I have to admit, I'm really curious about this.
It's a fascinating concept.
So can you elaborate on that a little bit? How did Bakhtiarov connect deconcentration to things like deep meditation or lucid dreaming or even mystical experiences?
Well, he saw deconcentration as a way of kind of breaking down those rigid structures of our everyday perception.
Okay.
Like, imagine our normal awareness is like looking through a narrow window, you know?
We only see a tiny slice of reality.
Exactly. And deconcentration, he said, is like widening that window,
I like that.
allowing us to see a much broader spectrum of experience.
So it's like we're removing the blinders and seeing the world with fresh eyes.
Exactly.
But did he give any concrete examples of what this might look like?
He did.
Okay, what did he say?
He described individuals who, through practicing deconcentration, were able to perceive like subtle energies,
Wow.
sense events happening at a distance, and even experience a merging of their consciousness with the world around them.
Okay, those are some pretty extraordinary claims.
They are.
I have to be honest, I'm a little skeptical. Is there any scientific evidence to back up these kinds of experiences?
It's true that these claims push the boundaries of what we currently understand about the mind.
Right.
And Bakhtiarov himself acknowledged that these experiences were difficult to study using traditional scientific methods.
So how do we even begin to make sense of them?
He saw deconcentration as opening up a whole new realm of exploration,
Like we're just scratching the surface.
exactly one that requires new ways of thinking about consciousness and its potential.
It sounds like he was really ahead of his time.
In many ways, he was.
And he wasn't afraid to challenge those conventional ways of thinking?
Not at all. In fact, he even drew parallels between deconcentration and some of the ideas explored in quantum physics.
Quantum physics, how so?
The idea that reality isn't as fixed and objective as we might assume.
So deconcentration isn't just about improving our focus.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It's a whole different way of understanding ourselves and the world around us.
Precisely.
This is blowing my mind.
It's a lot to take in.
But if deconcentration can lead to these profound shifts in consciousness, like you said,
Yeah.
what does that mean for our everyday lives? How can we actually apply these ideas, in a practical way?
That's the question, isn't it?
Yeah,
And I think it's something each individual needs to explore for themselves.
that makes sense.
Bakhtiarov believed that even a basic understanding of deconcentration could have a really positive impact on our lives,
Okay, in what way?
helping us to be more present, more aware, and more adaptable to change.
So it's not just about achieving those extraordinary states.
Right.
It's about bringing those qualities of expanded awareness into our everyday experience.
Exactly.
I can see that.
It's about noticing when we're stuck in those rigid patterns of thought,
When our attention is narrow and limited.
and then using the principles of deconcentration to widen our perspective to see things from multiple angles and to be more open to new possibilities.
That's a great way to put it.
It's about cultivating a sense of openness and curiosity, a willingness to step outside our comfort zones and explore the unknown.
I love that. So for all of you listening out there, I encourage you to explore this concept of deconcentration for yourselves.
Read Bakhtiarov's work
Experiment with the techniques.
and see what you discover. You might just unlock a whole new dimension of your own potential.
That's a great note to end on.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into deconcentration.